All right, welcome back to the channel, guys. It's been 102 uh, heat index today. It's been a hot one, let me tell you. Now, today I got frustrated trying to install some new gauges in the Chevy under the glove box here. The problem I had was trying to get holes drilled to match the bezel, and I've got an Autometer three gauge setup with the oil pressure, water temperature, and voltmeter. Now, the voltmeter is a waste of time in my book, but the gauge is there. It looks nice. I've got a vacuum gauge, an Autometer vacuum gauge, that I would like to replace it, to put that in the trio. The bezel is kind of a gray. It's not chrome, but with that new chrome paint I've got, I can take care of that. Anyway, let me show you what all this looks like. All right, hang on. All right, guys, we're here in the Chevy, and this is my sun tack. Let me hit the key so it'll light up for you. Well, not sun, but Equus tack with my chrome bezel. Now, now I've spent the day mounting my new Autometer gauges in the Chevy, and they're kind of the large print version for aging hot rodders, Tri-5 owners. All right, now let's see. There's what they look like, and it's a good looking set of gauges. Water temperature on the left, oil pressure, and voltmeter. Now I will tell you, the voltmeter is kind of a useless gauge to me, and I've got a Autometer vacuum gauge. I may swap that out, or I may mount the uh, the vacuum gauge in a different place. But the gauges work. Now I will tell you, these gauges, of course, these are 2 5/8 inch. They're the bigger gauges, and the bezel, mounting the bezel, turned out to be trickier than I expected. There are 3 mounting holes in the bezel that attach to the holes in whatever surface you're going to use to mount. Well, I used the bottom edge of the dash. And of course, there were several holes there from the previous gauge cluster. And of course, none of those holes match up. So I had to drill new holes. And I was trying to use the smallest fastener I could. And I ended up with drilling holes with bits that were too small. And the dashboard steel was pretty tough. And I broke a couple of bits. So that kind of made my day there, of course. Anyway, I finally I went to the hardware store and I picked up some. I think they're number 12 by half Phillips head sheet metal screws, very short, and those were the perfect fit. I got the appropriate size bit, and I drilled the holes, and they worked just great. Now, one thing you might want to keep in mind if you're going to change out or put a new set of gauges, under dash gauges in your Tri-5, and that's that the mounting holes on this bezel, you cannot access them with the gauges in the bezel. The gauges actually block straight up access into the mounting point on all 3 holes. So I've had to mount this thing. The 3 gauges are just setting in place. I had to remove the mounts on all 3 just to access the mounting holes. But I'll fix that tomorrow. But and I've got to take care of the wiring. Like there's the water temperature tubing. I've got to neaten all that wiring up and put it back up out of sight underneath the dash. But there they are. But just remember, check before you buy a cluster gauge and you want to put them in. Make sure that with the gauges in place, you can still access the mounting holes. Because I realized last night while I was working on it that I couldn't, and that all the gauges had to come out. And then I had to, once I got the bezel mounted firmly in place, then I could install the gauges. And I had to run the oil pressure tubing through the bezel, hook it to the gauge, and then I had to run the water temperature uh, sending unit and the tubing. I had to run that through the bezel and then on out into underneath the engine compartment or under the hood, and got all that done. So tomorrow I'll neaten up and button up the rest of the gauges, and they work. I've already had it up to operating temperature. 40. The oil pressure looks good. I don't have the voltmeter hooked up yet, but I will. I need to find a spot that's only that's controlled with the key switch. Now, obviously, my cigarette lighter, this thing is on all the time because you can see that my little speedometer gauge comes on when I plug the adapter in. Anyway, I can fix that. I'll be able to fix that. Really digging my old school tack. It looks good, and it doesn't do the little boogie woogie dance when you hit the key and start it up. And that's what I didn't like, and that's what I like about this one. All right, let me show you the gauge cluster that came out of here and some differences between it and these gauges, besides the fact that the old gauge cluster had two 2 1/8 inch, I think, gauges, and this has 2 5/8. Anyway, I much prefer these gauges, much easier to read. All right, guys, this was the original gauge cluster that was mounted in the Chevy. Uh, now, it was it was it was this isn't the way it was mounted. This is how you had to turn it to read the gauges correctly. This was how it was mounted, like this. And the gauge, when you look at how the sweep of the gauges, it looks correct, right? Well, look at the nomenclature on the printing. It's upside down. And then look at the gauges and how they read. The lettering's upside down because the gauges aren't designed to read that way. But that's the way they were in the Chevy. It's designed to be read that way. So what I ended up doing for the temporary was I just rotated all the gauges. I just rotated the gauges back the way they should have been and mounted it back like that. And so that got the gauges in the right orientation, and they're not quite fixed there, but anyway, you get the picture. But I will tell you that at first blush, the gauges look correct when they were upside down because we're used to gauges reading with a sweep like that, and not one where it's the needle's hinged at the top. Anyway, this was the original gauge cluster. Now these are 2-inch gauges, and the printing on them is pretty teeny tiny. Now I opted to go with a set of 3 odometer gauges with a chrome bezel. You know how much I love chrome. And now the crazy thing about it, and this is a hint for those of you who plan to put gauges or replace the gauge cluster. First thing is, now on this bezel, you see the holes are near each edge, and there's holes in the middle. Uh, on the odometer gauge cluster, the holes actually are blocked by the meter. With this, you could actually get a screwdriver in both sides or even up the middle of these. You can see you could get a long screwdriver up to attach these screws without any interference. Not so with the odometer triple gauge cluster that I had. I had to actually take the gauges out of the bezel and then mount the bezel under the dash. And of course, none of the previous holes that were in the very bottom of the dash for previous mountings for gauges matched up. So anyway, I had to drill new holes. I ended up using, I think, let's see, no, not number 10, number 12, very, very short um, sheet metal screws to mount the bezel. And that worked really, really well uh, and kept the screws short. And I may have to modify my glove box. I may have to notch the edges where the screws come up through the bottom of the dash. Anyway, I'll have it done and be ready to cruise. This Saturday, we've got a church picnic that our car group's been invited to, and I wouldn't mind going. That's just going to be a hot one. And then on Sunday, we have our regular monthly Whiskey City cruise event from noon to 6, and that promises also to be a hot one. Anyway, I do have a shade tent, and usually several of us get our tents and kind of tie them all together to make a big shady spot where we can all gather and shoot the breeze, etc., etc. Ogle cars, all that good stuff. All right, guys, if you're going to put a gauge cluster like this in, check out this bezel and make sure when you need to mount it. I could mount this one back in the car and not have to worry about taking these gauges out, uh, to do it. But on the gauge cluster I have now, there's no way I could mount the gauges, leave the gauges in the bezel while I'm mounting it. There's just no way to get to the screwdriver on the screws in the process. So anyway, just be advised to check that out before you have the gauges mounted where you want them, and you may realize that you've got to change your plans a little bit. The one thing you can count on, however, is the knowledge that none of the screw holes you have are going to fit what you need. That's just a fact of life, guys. All right. Well, I'm going to head inside where it's about 40 degrees cooler. So we'll be back with another update. Until then, keep cool and get out and enjoy the weather while you can. All right, take care. We'll see you next time with another update from the Shade Tree Garage. Take care.